We're going to go ahead and begin. I want to thank all of you who have showed up. We're really grateful for your participation in this roundtable discussion. My name is Chris Neidl. I'm one of the co-founders of the OpenAir Collective. We're a global grassroots network of volunteers that are advancing carbon dioxide removal through national and subnational policy. The goal of today is for us to be able to present with our partners a policy draft proposal that we've developed over the last now few months. It really kicked off with COP26 in Glasgow, was the beginning of it. And our team has been researching and exploring policy options that would help build a carbon dioxide removal economy here in Ireland. We, through our research, drew on lots of different models that have emerged in both the private and public sector to make a made in Ireland policy. Now, who's behind this? This has been an excellent collaborative effort. In addition to OpenAir, we're extremely excited to be partnering with Carbon Gap and the Foundation for Climate Restoration on this effort, who have been active partners in the draft development phase. Carbon Gap, we'll have one of our members will throw it in the chat. Carbon Gap is really one of the leading advocacy groups in Europe that's advancing carbon dioxide removal. And the Foundation for Climate Restoration is one of the first civil society organizations established to advance climate restoration, carbon dioxide removal, and has a presence globally. So it was amazing to work with a team of about 12 people in developing the proposal that you're going to hear about today. So my job is just to sort of, you'll hear from me later at the end, but I just want to go over the agenda with you, and then I'll pass it off to my partner, John Beckett, who will get us started. So what we're going to do is first, you'll hear from John, who's a member of the team representing the Nature Trust. He's going to talk a little bit about why are we here? What's the rationale for the proposal that we're putting forward? Then Kezia Wright, an OpenAir member, also based in Dublin, as is John, will just give a high-level overview of the actual policy, draft policy as it stands, the main components. We did circulate a draft memo yesterday, so some of you may have already become acquainted at a high level with what we're proposing. Then we're going to pass it over to Eli Mitchell-Larson, who's the lead advocate for Carbon Gap. And he's gonna moderate a panel discussion with a great mix, who will be introduced later, of folks in academia, in government, and subject experts to kind of give their initial takes on what we've proposed. And that'll be about a half an hour or so. And then really the most important part, we think, is the last half an hour, where we're going to break into small groups. You'll be assigned to them. And then we're going to go ahead and get your impressions, because that's really the point of today. We're at a lot of work has gone into this, but we're at an early stage. And now is to get more ideas, more thoughts and perspectives, so that we can make this a full proposal that we can begin to advocate for in 2022. And then that'll be the end. So a nice hour and a half. And of course, we hope that this is the beginning of a relationship with all of you as we move forward with this initiative. So with that, I'm very pleased to pass it along to my friend and partner, John Beckett, who was really one of the founders of this initiative, who's going to talk a little bit about why we're here. So John, over to you.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. And indeed, thank you to everybody who's shown up today. We are delighted to have you here for our panel discussion and the roundtable event, where we're going to share, as Chris said, some details of our draft policy proposal document, which is designed to support the development of a carbon dioxide removal sector in Ireland. And we believe that Ireland is uniquely well positioned to do this. Now, my name is John Beckett, and I'm a member of OpenAir, and I'm also a co-founder of the Nature Trust here in Ireland, which is a reforestation and environmental rehabilitation not-for-profit. What is CDR is the question. So carbon dioxide removal is any activity that removes CO2 from the atmosphere and durably stores it in geological, terrestrial, or ocean reservoir, or indeed in products. So what are we trying to achieve? We're seeking to develop a policy framework that supports innovation in CDR, primarily in order to help scale quickly. So we're solution agnostic, which means that we're, if it's a nature-based solution, if it's a technology solution, we're agnostic to that. But we are primarily, in the innovation side here, we're primarily looking at the technology solutions. We are in the middle of a climate and biodiversity emergency. Average temperatures are continuing to warm year on year. We're in the midst of a human-created mass extinction event. We must eliminate our reliance on fossil fuels. Everybody knows this. I think certainly everybody at this event accepts that, not just from the perspective of energy security, which has become absolutely front and center over the last month in particular, but to prevent catastrophic climate breakdown. We burn fossil fuels, it emits CO2, it traps heat in the atmosphere, creating this greenhouse effect, and that warms the planet. And that warming changes weather patterns, resulting in floods, storms, droughts, and it's getting worse every year. So every credible model for limiting temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius, as outlined as a key target of the Paris Agreement, includes carbon dioxide removal. We're going to need to remove 10 billion tons of carbon per year by 2050, and that's going to increase to 20 billion tons a year by 2100. So this is an enormous scale challenge. At the moment, we're removing kilotons and thousands of tons per year. So the tech, while there's some great innovation out there, there needs to be a lot more, and it doesn't yet exist at the scale needed to be able to tackle the problem, and particularly in how it's built into all of the key models that everybody is relying on. This technology just is not there yet. Next slide, please. So our priority needs to be aggressive reduction in emissions. We need to also think about investing heavily in adaptation to kind of mitigate for the unavoidable climate change that's already baked into the system with emissions that from emissions that have already been released, or the damage that's already been done. But we have to prioritize investment in CDR at scale as quickly as possible. So the development of our draft proposal has been done in partnership with a number of key stakeholders, all of whom we're very grateful to have here. Stripe is a key partner here, and you're going to hear from Hannah on the panel as well. Stripe has built the most successful global model for funding CDR innovation, and they effectively, because I don't want to give Hannah's pitch for her here, because she's going to be much better at me than explaining it, but effectively Stripe have built a model where they are a buyer of first resort for CDR innovation companies, so that they give market certainty that there will definitely be a customer to buy the carbon dioxide that you're capturing, or the CDR that you're achieving, with a view to bringing these innovations down the cost curve, so that they can scale up to the kind of gigaton level of performance. So they have been remarkably successful, and obviously in Ireland we're particularly proud of Stripe as an organization. But the fact that they have done this as well, this Stripe climate model is extraordinary. We believe that the opportunity here is for Ireland to build on that approach, to build on the approach that Stripe has taken, but on a national level. So what are we going to need for that? We need catalytic policy. We need to support demand with procurement incentives. We need to foster innovation and target this fast deployment of scaling solutions that have been proven as part of this program. And what will that give for Ireland? So we'll facilitate project development and investment in Ireland. We'll lower the cost of carbon dioxide removal as these solutions scale and move down the cost curve. And we'll create an entirely new sector in the economy with the associated jobs and economic opportunities that come from that. Now, all of that is going to need to be underpinned with rigorous standards to ensure that the projects are of extremely high quality. So Ireland has been a real laggard in climate change, right? That we have slipped over the last year from 39th place to 46th on this CCPI, which is a ranking of the 60 highest emitting countries that represent about 90% of global emissions. This is just depressing. There is no excuse for this. We're a small, dynamic, innovative, wealthy country. We should be leading the world with this stuff and setting an example for others to follow. We can lead. I believe we can do this. We lead in a number of areas. We are consistently ranked amongst the most innovative countries in the world. Enterprise Ireland is the largest venture capitalist in the world by number of deals done per annum. The IDA is world famous at attracting inward investment into Ireland. We can and must be part of the solution, and the challenge is enormous. And if you just go on to the next slide, we can see that we are already committed to doing this. This is a quote from the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Act of 2021. A climate neutral economy means a sustainable economy and society where greenhouse gas emissions are balanced or exceeded by the removal of those gases from the Earth's atmosphere through the use of natural or technological solutions in the state. So next slide, please. Today, we want to set Ireland on a course to become a global leader in CDR. The opportunity, we believe, is genuinely compelling for Ireland. And this draft document is, as Chris said in the introduction there, just a starting point, right? We want to develop and evolve this into a strategy roadmap and with a short-term focus. And we really want to make progress quickly with your support, with your continuing support. And you guys and you people, you folks are going to be absolutely critical to the success of this. We want to stake our claim as a leader in CDR, bringing those high quality jobs and investment to the country. So time is short. The stakes couldn't be higher. Thank you again for being here. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your perspective, your ideas. The panel, as Chris said, I won't go over it again. We have a panel coming up after Kezia's introduction to this document. The workshops are critical. We'd really ask you to stick around for the workshops because we're keen to share our thoughts, feedback, and insights. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to take those learnings and that feedback, compile it into a kind of a summary, which we will share with everybody. And again, we really hope for your continued support for this, for what we believe is really a vital initiative. So I'm now going to hand over to Kezia Wright of OpenAir, who's going to give this brief summary of the key elements of this draft proposal before we begin the panel.
Alrighty, so hi everyone. Really happy to be here. So my name is Kezia and I'm delighted to be a representative of OpenAir Collective. So, as a 20-something-year-old working in the climate space in Ireland today, it's pretty easy to feel quite hopeless about the climate situation. And I found great energy and momentum and actionability in the work of OpenAir Collective. Now, to echo what John said, CDR is absolutely not a substitute for eliminating greenhouse gas emissions, nor is it a substitute for investment in adaptation, but it is an absolutely necessary and parallel route in our climate journey as a country. Moreover, it's something that we see as having the potential to bring enormous social, environmental, and economic benefits to Ireland. So what I'm going to do now is just lay out the 5 key components of the draft policy proposal. So as alluded to by John, this policy proposal draws on key learnings and elements from existing or proposed CDR procurement models, both at the national and subnational levels and within the private sector. So there are early stage and proposed CDR procurement programs already exist in Sweden, where they have a BECCS or bioenergy carbon capture and storage reverse auction procurement scheme. Also in Luxembourg, where they've assumed to be introduced negative emissions tariff, and also in New York State with the Carbon Dioxide Removal Leadership Act. The proposal also is heavily influenced by private sector CDR purchasing initiatives that have been led by companies such as Stripe, Microsoft, Swiss Re, and Shopify. And we're going to hear a little bit more later on about the work that Stripe has done in this space. Now, there are still gaps to be filled in this proposal, and part of this exercise is to stimulate some questions and discussions around how an effective CDR program could be implemented in Ireland and how this could benefit Ireland socially, economically, and environmentally as well. Alrighty, so the main component of this policy proposal is an annual public-private CDR procurement pilot program. This would involve a public-private partnership between the government and a coalition of private sector firms. So coalition private sector members would make voluntary donor contributions, and then this would be matched with public funds or in-kind incentives to fund an annual CDR procurement program. So government incentives could include things like tax incentives, regulatory incentives, innovation supports, labour market policies, and the likes. A program of this kind could be co-designed and administered with input from multiple agencies, including the IDA, Enterprise Ireland, the EPA, and the SFI, just to name but a few. And then following the pilot phase, the government could then assess the program performance and make adjustments based on the key learnings. So Ireland is really uniquely positioned here, as John already alluded to in the intro. We have a very unique economic, regulatory, and resource landscape that features an economy both centered on high technology and innovation, and also on natural resources with a very vibrant agricultural, forestry and peatland sectors. So we're very well positioned to gain an advantage and capture some benefits that a multi-gigaton CDR sector promises. Now, through funding CDR pathways in Ireland, we'd be helping to validate the market and the technology for CDR pathways that at the moment are simply not to scale. And funding CDR will also bring about significant cost reduction of these technologies. So a good comparison would be the enormous cost reduction seen in solar PV due to early government support in the 1990s and the early 2000s. So as explained in this Stripe quote, negative emissions technology is a key part of our climate journey, and early buy-in will help to drive the cost curve down and also see enormous benefit to early adopters. So the idea here is that the government provides a regulatory and a financial framework that catalyzes climate action and private sector involvement in the burgeoning CDR space. And what we're proposing is similar in structure to Stripe's program in that it will involve a coalition of private sector buyers aggregating their contributions into a common fund. So over the last couple of months, we've been having some really fascinating conversations with a lot of experts, members of civil society, people involved in the government about different CDR opportunities and pathways in Ireland. And it's become clear that there are lots of areas for development, especially around peat restoration, direct air capture, biochar, CO2 mineralization, to name but a few. However, before pursuing a CDR procurement program, it's clear that we would need further investigation and a more comprehensive study into the most viable CDR pathways in Ireland and how these pathways will benefit Ireland's economy, environment and society. So the second key part of the proposal and the first step in any implementation of this policy would be to carry out an economic and social assessment report of CDR opportunities in Ireland. This would help us to determine the potential scope, scale, and shared benefits of CDR in Ireland, and it would look at the domestic opportunities and constraints that are associated with different CDR pathways. So this assessment would engage various sources of expertise from academia, civil society, and the public and private sectors, and the outcome would ultimately inform the decisions and the priorities for the CDR project selection. So a third key component of the policy proposal is a focus on local projects and companies and diverse CDR pathways. So all projects selected during the procurement pilot must be located within Ireland or initiated by Irish companies or companies that have a substantial presence in Ireland. And this clause would ensure that the benefits will be derived for Irish society and Irish economy. The pilot should also include a portfolio of diverse CDR pathways rather than just a single or narrow set of CDR solutions. And this allows valuable CDR integration within multiple sectors of the Irish economy. So the fourth key to the proposal and something that's really important when it comes to CDR is having the pathways that are standards-based and solution agnostic, as John mentioned earlier on. So successful CDR procurement must be rooted in a set of clear principles and standards that not only guide the investment, but that also ensure an accurate measurement and accounting of CDR. So best practice work around CDR is often guided by a set of principles called the Oxford Principles. And these ensure that selection criteria for CDR ensures additionality. So that's essentially the idea that the projects come directly as a result of the policy and would not have happened otherwise had the policy not had been there. A minimum CO2 storage durability and verifiability of removals and storage. Other principles include a do no harm clause and preferential selection for proposals that demonstrate economic, social, and environmental co-benefits. So the final key to the policy proposal that we're putting forward is that, here we have a kind of vision of Irish global leadership in this sector and in climate action more broadly. And it's important that we share this vision and rally the enthusiasm and engagement of the broader Irish public through some sort of campaign. And we want to make people feel proud and engaged with this subject. So any kind of social campaign could draw on design elements from other successful global innovation prizes, such as the Virgin Earth Challenge or the Carbon X Prize. An additional element could also be the development of a secondary education STEM curriculum or some kind of structured activity that engages the youth in the subject. And then finally, a procurement program could also provide individuals the opportunity to contribute to the fund through crowdfunding best practices. So to wrap up with all of that, the policy proposal that we have developed consists of an annual public-private CDR procurement pilot, a techno-economic and social impact assessment of CDR opportunities in Ireland, a focus on local projects and companies and diverse CDR pathways, a standards-based and solution-agnostic CDR pathways, and engaging the broader Irish public in this. So again, just to kind of reiterate, this proposal is a vision for what is possible, and it's a really viable way for Ireland to show some real global leadership on climate action, and it presents an opportunity for Ireland to take a lead in the global CDR economy by drawing on some of the strengths and resources that we already have as a country. So thank you so much for listening. That's the end of the presentation, and I'm now going to hand over to Eli Mitchell-Larson, who's the launch director of Carbon Gap and a member of OpenAir. Thanks.
Thank you, Kez, for that brilliant summary of the policy proposal, and welcome everybody to the panel discussion. And just to reiterate what Chris was saying earlier, we're really excited as well to not just hear your reactions and critiques of the policy proposal, but really to co-create this together. And so this panel is the first step on that journey, where we're going to hear directly from folks, an incredible panel. We've got Hannah Bebbington from Stripe Climate, who leads strategy for Stripe Climate. Previously had roles at Thrive Capital, Impossible Foods, and Bain & Company. We've got Brian Ledden, who's the TD from the Green Party representing Limerick in the lower house of the Oireachtas, the Irish Parliament. And previously, he was a Green Party councillor representing Limerick City North. We've got Sive O'Neill joining us from Dublin City University School of Law and Government, who lectures on climate change policy and politics, and who's actually currently standing for election to the Seanad in 2022, and has previously served as an elected official in the Dublin City Council, also with the Green Party. And as well, David Power from Dogpatch Labs, Ireland's leading entrepreneurial hub, who brings a wealth of expertise on how to build functioning innovation ecosystems, and a bunch of pieces there that are going to be critical if we want to get a carbon removal ecosystem up and running in Ireland. So that's the panel of experts we have to begin reacting to the policy proposal. But then we'll have this opportunity for these breakout rooms following. And really, we want by the end of this event today for everyone to feel like this is our collective policy proposal or set of ideas, not just something that you're reacting to. So that's the explicit goal. And I think the framing for the conversation we're about to have, again, it's about seeking input. We want to have an open conversation about what you've just heard. Skepticism is welcome, questions are welcome, as well as details of how you think we can actually turn this from idea to functioning campaign that we can start to build a coalition around. So without further ado, well, I'll also say that I think the kind of overarching themes that we do want to cover, if we can, are what makes for a good public-private partnership. When you take something that's been piloted in many instances in the private sector, as exemplified by Stripe, Microsoft, and a few others, and you bring that into a public procurement where you're using the public purse to pay for something, that obviously has significant implications. So we want to make sure we get it right. And also, I think on the other side of the coin, no policy incentive can be successful without the sort of capacity to meet it. And that really comes into play with the innovation ecosystem in Ireland. So what would be needed for carbon removal providers to set up shop in Ireland, so to speak? So those are some of the themes we'll cover. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over first to Hannah Bebbington of Stripe Climate. And Hannah, I mean, in many ways, Stripe has been the inspiration for this proposal, for many other procurement. I think Stripe was really, caught everybody by surprise in 2019 when you first made this commitment. So, and what's interesting to me, having worked a bit myself on the Microsoft procurement, is, the different approach that Stripe and Klarna and a few others, but certainly Stripe was the pioneer, have taken to supporting, very early stage climate solutions. So if you could just walk folks through a bit of the history, the impetus, and then we can shift gears and talk about what it would mean to turn this into a policy.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Eli. And thanks, Chris and John, for having us. We're so happy to be here. Hey, everyone. I'm Hannah Bevington. I lead strategy for Stripe Climate. Stripe originally made a negative emissions pledge in 2019. And this pledge was born out of looking at the IPCC charts, very similar to what John showed a couple of minutes ago, and realizing that the world is going to need to radically scale carbon removal in addition to reducing emissions if we're to have any hope of getting to net zero by 2050. As John mentioned, experts estimate we'll have to do on the order of 5 to 10 billion tons of durable removal annually by 2050. And yet the carbon removal technology industry is really, really far behind. We don't yet know which technologies will get us to this level of scale. Stripe's unique advantage in this market is that we can be a customer and help bring these new technologies to market much more quickly. So since our original pledge in 2019, we've purchased carbon removal from 14 carbon removal technology companies, in fact, a couple of which are on the phone today with us. And for 11 of the 14 in this portfolio, we were their first customer. So as you mentioned, Eli, we focus on finding really early stage, highly promising carbon removal technology. And we focus on carbon removal that meets a specific set of target criteria instead of predetermining any specific removal pathway that we may be interested in. So we buy carbon removal that's permanent for more than 1,000 years, that doesn't take up a lot of arable land and has a path to being cheap at scale. So in essence, Stripe is buying the types of carbon removal that we think could be a meaningful part of the 2050 portfolio. And as a result, our portfolio is intentionally really, really diverse. We don't feel ready to pick a horse, and we want to see, especially today, as many high potential attempts as possible. And so we intentionally support a wide variety of carbon removal technology that meets our criteria. So, by buying the types of carbon removal that we hope to see in the world, we send a signal to the market that says, if you build, we will buy. And as a customer, what makes us, even more impactful is that at Stripe, we can leverage our distribution network and pull more dollars to carbon removal than we could spend on our own. So the product Stripe Climate enables any Stripe user that uses Stripe for payment processing or billing or checkout or so on to contribute to scaling carbon removal. So today we have 15,000 small businesses on our platform who each give on average 1% of their revenue to scaling carbon removal technology. So in total to date, we've deployed $15 million into the space in the form of pre-purchase agreements and milestone payments. And, looking forward, we know that we Stripe nor any business could really get carbon removal on the right trajectory alone. If we're to get to 5 to 10 billion tons a year annually, as John mentioned, the carbon removal market is going to have to be at least 100 billion, if not $1 trillion annually. So we need creative policy interventions today to ensure that, one, the technologies required to hit the 5 to 10 billion tons can scale to that capacity quickly, and two, to ensure that the customer demand is there when they do. And so we're super excited to be part of the conversation today. We're deeply proud of Stripe's Irish roots and honestly would love to play a role in making Ireland a carbon removal leader. So thank you for having us and excited for the conversation.
Thank you, Hannah. And thank you to you and to Stripe for, indeed being one of the absolute pioneers here and being, I think it was John earlier or Chris who said the buyer of first resort, right? Who's really stepping in at that critical moment. So thank you. And actually, before we turn over to Sive and Brian, I wanted to ask you a quick follow-up question, Hannah, which is, I think when we think about what some of these technology providers need to actually build a plant, when you think about the kind of million-ton scale and just getting larger and larger, one of the things that we've heard at Carbon Gap from a lot of providers is, they need that long-term price stability. And so that takes the form of, fixed prices over many years, in some case decades. And that's what we saw happen with the solar and offshore wind revolution with things like power purchase agreements in the US or contracts for difference in the UK. So I think, as I understand it, the initial Stripe model is kind of one-time purchases because it simply is so early stage and that's what you have the capacity to do, which makes sense. What are you hearing from your, I don't want to call them, I guess, sellers, members, companies that you've worked with? What are you hearing in terms of the kind of policy incentive that they're looking for? And I want to come back to this question later with Dave, who works with a lot of startups of various kinds. What are you hearing from them, and what implications does that have as we're starting to build something that's a public-private partnership?
Yeah, so at Stripe, we're very cognizant of trying to structure our purchase agreements to be as impactful as possible for our suppliers. So when we started this effort in 2019, you're right, we structured our purchases as pre-purchase agreements. So incredibly supplier friendly. And it said, we want to buy X tons of removal at Y price to be delivered by Z date in the future, often 2024 or beyond, but we will pay today. And there's very limited recourse for non-delivery. So in essence, it's non-dilutive capital. That really works for organizations that are, say, seed stage or maybe Series A, are pre-first facility and are really trying to test their first demonstration plan. As those organizations mature, they have to raise much larger sums of money. We're talking building first of a kind facilities that are on the order of $5 to $10+ million per plant. In order to pull that level of project finance at any reasonable terms, these organizations, as you mentioned, need long-term offtake agreements. So not point in time single purchase structures, but rather we will buy X tons of carbon removal every single year at this price over the life cycle of a specific facility. We at Stripe are thinking about how do we evolve our purchase structure to both continue to support those really new suppliers where a pre-purchase agreement may make most sense given where they are in the field, but also grow with those suppliers that are ready for more mature and sophisticated types of agreements.
Excellent, thank you. I'd love to bring in Sive and Brian into the conversation now. And maybe starting with you, Sive, if you don't mind. You're a climate policy expert and researcher. You focus on climate change policy and politics, and you're also a candidate for the Seanad and have experience in elected office. So I wonder if you could share your thoughts. I mean, I'm just really curious to hear your and Brian's thoughts, both in reactions in general to what we're proposing, but specifically your thoughts on how carbon removal and the program like what we're proposing, how might that fit into a larger long-term policy response to the climate emergency, specifically Ireland's response? Do you see that fitting, or kind of how does it come across initially?
Thanks so much. And it is an excellent question, because clearly the Irish policy is supposed to match our commitments under the Paris Agreement, and Ireland is part of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and so on. So what we do is supposed to mirror not just the global ambition, but also reflect our shared and fair contribution to that global effort. So that means that by definition, there is a space for carbon dioxide removal, the reports all say. But I'm not a technical expert, and I'm also not an innovator in the sense that you guys are. I haven't worked in the business space. And for those of us who've been working in the policy area, the main challenge that we have is on the mitigation side. If only we had your innovation, your imagination, your skills, your vision working on the mitigation side, perhaps we would be a lot closer to achieving our goals. Because actually mitigation as fossil fuel addiction is not a technical problem. It's a political problem, it's a social problem, it's a cultural problem, and to a certain extent, it's an economic problem as well in terms of the transformation that's needed. And I say all of that because I'm very kind of an activist and somebody working on these issues, that the limited capacity that there is in public debate for gearing up for what we need to do. And what scares me, and I have to just put this on the table, is the idea that all the best brains will run off working on CDR, and Brian and myself will be plugging away on that. Well, what about getting off the fossil fuels, and with the gas problem, and all those coal fires and so on. So those problems are not separate. We are supposed to be approaching climate policy in a step fashion. We are supposed to be doing mitigation before we start looking to these removal technologies. but I completely understand that they need to be part of the overall picture. So that's kind of what scares me. I have a couple of other observations as well around the particular proposal, but maybe you want to bring Brian in first.
Yeah, sure. Why don't we keep the conversation flowing, and we'll come back to that. That sounds great, Saib. Thank you for that. And I do want to come back to the points, the very important points you've raised that we in the CDR community refer to as the kind of moral hazard that CDR is said to pose, or the threat of mitigation deterrence. And I hope we have some kind of promising suggestions and answers there for how we can make sure that removals and mitigation actually work together. And actually, we're loosely part of an effort to try to reframe how we talk about climate change, reactions to climate change at the UNFCCC level, away from just thinking adaptation and mitigation, instead to think about adapt, reduce, and remove. The fact that we must adapt to the problem as it exists, we must reduce emissions to reduce the extent to which the problem gets worse, and we have no choice but to remove the emissions that are already up there to help sort of undo some of that damage. So love to come back to that conversation because it's really great that you brought it up. Sorry, over to you, Brian, and then we'll keep going from there.
Thank you very much, Eli, and hello to everybody. It's really good to be here. It's quite exciting to see an initiative like this spring up in such a short time frame after the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, which probably many of us were at, and there was some hope coming out of Glasgow, but perhaps not enough. But I think this initiative here maybe can offer us some more hope. I'm very delighted that Stripe are so heavily involved. I come from Limerick, which is the city that gave birth to Stripe some years ago. So it's great that Limerick is playing an important role here. I'm a politician fairly new to politics, and before that I was an engineer. Maybe I still am an engineer, and I have an interest in this stuff. I find carbon removal, this discussion quite challenging because it's predicated in many respects on technology that just simply isn't there yet. And if I, as an engineer, mechanical engineer who is very interested in the space, doesn't see yet how that technology can be scaled up to the level that Kezia mentioned, 100 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year by 2030, and 200 billion like this. These are phenomenal volumes of carbon dioxide to pull out of our atmosphere one way or another. So I'm challenged by that, I have to say, and I think any discussion about carbon dioxide removal needs to really offer confidence that this is a credible way forward. It's something we've discussed a lot in Parliament and at the committee level, and our committee has been very involved in drafting and in refining the legislation. I was interested to see those words that you had on the screen there a while ago, which were words that we wrote into the Act, and I'm very proud of the fact that we wrote that into the Act, and maybe have set off a positive chain reaction of industry and society beginning to seriously tackle the challenge that we have, and I can see by this initiative that is evidence of it. I want to echo the concerns, I suppose, that Saib mentioned, but Eli, you did actually address them. It's quite heartening to hear you speak about the moral hazard, and that you have actually been interested. The huge concern we have is that carbon removal is seen as this magic escape route, this way out of our climate challenge, and we can keep doing business as usual, and at some point some smart person or group of people is going to come up with this magic solution, and so long as, if that is the discourse, we are seriously at risk of not doing what we need to do. And I think Saib is correct. And Sive has been in this space a lot longer than I have. I would listen to her very carefully. She really is an expert and has been tracking this for a number of decades. That is my concern, and I think we do need to be talking about mitigation so much more and so much more seriously, and not get, like, while carbon removal is absolutely important, let's not be distracted by the shiny thing, and maybe find ourselves wanting, as this crisis is getting worse and worse, and perhaps irreversibly worse. So those are my initial thoughts, Eli, and but I'm happy to come back in again.
Thank you. I think we have to get into this conversation. I think one piece of what you said, though, might be a great opportunity for Hannah to respond potentially, which is this question, very good question you posed, Brian, about, can these techniques, and I always try to use the term technique because in carbon removal, the line between technology, nature, natural processes, biogeochemistry is always quite blurry, because the umbrella of what we're talking about is everything from growing kelp offshore to re-wetting peatlands to removing carbon through biogenic processes like sugar production, any sort of fermentation, and then of course direct air capture, which is probably the thing too many people jump to when they hear the term carbon removal, which is, that's just actually one tiny slice of the great panoply of solutions that we'll need to deploy. So among those techniques, I think you raised a really good question, can those techniques actually achieve million-ton, billion-ton scale? And what I think is really cool about Stripe's procurement is that was an explicit criteria they used, as I understand it. Hannah, do you want to come in on that piece specifically?
Yeah, of course. So the whole intent of what Stripe Climate is trying to do is use purchases to help organizations get to a meaningful scale by 2030, 2040, 2050. We have a specific set of target criteria, which include the idea that an organization today may be very small scale and very expensive. We're known for buying carbon removal tons up to $2,000 a ton, with the demonstrable path that this type of technique or technology can scale in the next coming decades. So we characterize this as explicitly vetting our carbon removal technologies for their ability to get to sub $100 a ton at greater than half a gigaton of scale. So we support technologies that we think, again, can be, quote, a meaningful part of the portfolio as we move forward.
Got it. And so part of that analysis is, looking at learning rates or techno-economic studies, what's the total storage potential? What kind of reservoirs could accommodate such volumes of carbon dioxide? Is the technology potentially on a pathway to get to that point? So I think that it is a good question, but I think, the family of carbon removal techniques, some of them are indeed very nascent. There's no indication either way whether they can achieve million-ton scale. Others are quite mature, and definitely they could if we chose to use them. But I think we really need to turn to the really important point that both Sive and Brian have raised, which is this question of the moral hazard. And I think all of us, who are kind of part of the carbon removal community, we all started in the climate change community. And I would always hazard to say that, we should try to think in terms of growing the pie of excitement and interest in climate rather than sort of fighting over any specific slices. So I 100% agree with Sive and Brian's strong point that there needs to be more conversation about mitigation. That needs to be what we're talking about constantly, but there also needs to be more conversation about carbon removal. So if we look at what the IPCC models say about getting to 1.5 degrees, roughly speaking, it's about cutting emissions by, or getting emissions down by 40 billion tons a year and increasing removals by 10. So there is a role to play in, even the most conservative climate models that keep us within safe limits for removals at large scale. So what I think would be interesting is if we could, and I think what's problematic about the moral hazard argument is that people that think there's a moral hazard rightfully point out that there might be. And people that don't think there's a moral hazard sort of just say, no, we'll just make sure we reduce emissions before we remove them. And neither of those points are actually sort of rooted in any kind of test. So I wonder if we can tease out from kind of other policy precedents, how could we make sure that the intention to remove carbon actually inspires mitigation? And one example would be with Swiss Street, which someone brought up earlier. This is a company that's committed to remove any carbon they emit at $100 a ton. And so what effect that has is it gives Swiss Re a $100 a ton incentive to reduce their emissions. So it actually accelerates their decarbonization if they're holding themselves to that high standard. Now that's just one example, but we could try to do something similar with this policy, where we try to make sure that none of the removals that Ireland would be supporting under this framework would happen without providing that additional incentive to reduce emissions on top of all the existing policies that are already out there. I wonder if Sive or Brian, David, anybody wants to come in on this conversation and see if we can make sense of it.
That's a really, really interesting example. A couple of the questions I was going to come to kind of speak to that as well. And the first is that the focus of climate policy has always been looking for this kind of magic lever that's going to drive the changes that are needed. So on the one hand, you have the concept of the CO2 equivalent, the ton of emissions or emissions avoided, emissions abated, whatever. And then on the other hand, you have the idea of the carbon price. And I think that over the last 20 years, we've seen enough evidence to have learned to great pain that neither of these two levers or concepts are going to work to get where we need to be. And there's complicated reasons for that. In terms of carbon pricing, there's a whole set of issues around that. It's never high enough. Now, the example we gave there, Swiss Re, is a really interesting one. But just take what's happening at the moment in the European Union in the context of Russian gas and all of that debate about getting off gas much more quickly. It has actually spurred the fossil fuel sector on to try to use that as an excuse to extract and drill more and to open up fields that would have otherwise been left alone. So we haven't completely won the political argument around decarbonisation. And at the same time, there has also been some critiques of the IPCC models in the sense of some academic researchers have been saying, why is that carbon dioxide removal even there at all in the first place? There is a role for net zero in terms of the carbon flux between oceans and land, but the moral hazard is almost built into the IPCC scenarios. So they're not beyond critique in themselves. And as I said, the CO2 equivalence has been queried and questioned a lot as well in certain policy debates. And the reason I'm saying that is just take the example of bogs, right? If you, in Ireland, we have upwards of 10, 11 million tons of carbon dioxide that are lost as a result of drained peatlands and drained organic soils released into the atmosphere, which is a tiny fraction of this global number we were talking about earlier. So if you have a project that's designed to re-wet the bogs, is that a removal or is that mitigation, right? And if you have different carbon prices operating on the removal side on the one hand and on the mitigation side on the other, is that going to, shift the kind of projects that happen? And again, the reason I'm using that as an example is that just looking at bogs as reservoirs of carbon completely sidelines the biodiversity, the community, the landscape, all the other co-benefits, the ecosystem benefits that healthy bog and wetlands provide. So looking at everything through the lens just of carbon dioxide can sometimes be excessively narrow. And I think if there was a way in which we could expand the concept of removal to incorporate ecosystem services more broadly and think about other co-benefits just beyond the ton of carbon that has a price, I think that would be a much better way of ticking some of the boxes. And the final point I was going to make is that just skimming through your proposal, there's no direct reference to offsetting. And one of the fears that I would have is that the projects that might be developed as removals might find their way into the offset market. And it's not obvious to me that that would be prevented in the kind of scenarios that you're building. And it might not be your fault. Like you could be developing removal projects that are procured by the government, but then end up somewhere else. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are about that.
Thank you, Sai. These are excellent points and reactions, and I don't think we have time to respond to all of them. And I'll also point out that this is exactly what we wanted, right? We want to hear this. And I think on your specific point about separating carbon benefits from non-carbon benefits, what are sometimes called co-benefits, absolutely. And that piece is, I think, in our initial thinking very much so. And we look to, John Beckett's project, the Nature Trust, as an excellent example of a public-private partnership in Ireland that's deeply prioritizing working forests. So there's an economic component. It's not just, pure play conservation, but working forests, habitat, ecosystem restoration, and carbon. Those are all objectives, but it doesn't get us around the fact that we do need to be able to measure carbon benefits explicitly. And we need to be able to separate that from the other benefits that we're providing. And we need to be able to be crisp and clear about what benefits we're trying to get out of a specific policy and measure them and make sure they're delivered. But I think 100% this is about valuing all of the benefits that these carbon removal techniques provide. And there's a bunch of other points. I wish we could get into them because they're so good. I really need to hand over to David Power. Tell us about, on the sort of innovation ecosystem side, you've worked for years in incubators. What's the kind of, are you seeing any activity from carbon removal providers, first of all? And if not, can you speak more in the abstract about what a successful policy might be that would actually foster the development of that innovation ecosystem around this theme in Ireland?
Sure. So first of all, I might just take a step back and just talk about, do we have this need for carbon capture? And the reality is that we have 1,000 things that we need to do. And I'm glad that somebody is looking at carbon capture. I'm glad that somebody's looking at wind. I'm glad that somebody's looking at hydrogen. I'm glad that somebody's looking at agricultural emissions. And we need to reduce them all. And as a human society, we have kind of infinite possibilities to pursue those avenues. And people are going to follow the path that they think is going to work. So I'm broadly very supportive of this proposal and what needs to get done. And I take heart from the fact that the IPCC is actually often very wrong. So they seem to have something against exponential curves or don't really seem to understand them. So they have failed consistently to predict the level of carbon that we're actually producing and releasing into the atmosphere. But on the other side, they've failed to anticipate things like the adoption of wind. For example, we're about 50 years ahead of where the third IPCC report thought that we would be in terms of wind. So we have the ability to get these technologies, and once we figure them out, we can scale them very quickly, and we tend to underestimate the rate that new technology is adopted at. So I think that's a really important point. So, today it's a moonshot, and tomorrow if we figure it out and we can scale it, that can happen very, very quickly, and could well be our saving grace. And we take moonshots all the time, and it's a good thing. So even at the lower end, if it's just something we're doing and it's forestry or whatever, and then we right up to the spectrum of direct air carbon capture, there's space for them all. Let's see what we can do. Let's push them all and push the frontiers on every single one of them. In terms of how we get this done from an ecosystem perspective, I think we're pushing on levers that are already halfway down. The best reason to do this is because it makes economic sense. I mean, the argument where it's analogous to smoking, I think is gone, right? It's that cigarette that you're taking right now isn't the one that's going to kill you. But we're on to the cigarettes that are going to kill us at this point. And we need to find ways of getting these technologies adopted and out there very, very quickly. And altruism is one way of doing that, and that's good, and that's the market pressure. Fear is another way, and we hear a lot of that. But probably the best way to get something done in the short term are economic reasons. And we see in Dogpatch, I work on both sides, by the way. So I work with the startups, but we also work with companies. So for example, we run our national energy provider, ESB, and we run their flagship innovation program. So I get a frontline seat to how a utility is thinking about, and they are looking at technologies like carbon capture as well as everything else. And then we have lots of companies who come to us, and they have very good financial reasons for looking at carbon. These days. ESG is a genuine pressure. The market wants to buy from companies that are socially responsible. That puts market pressure on these companies to do the right thing. The thing is that they don't often know what the right thing is to do. So particularly when we're looking at something like policy, it is up to governments, and it is up to private companies and public companies in particular to really take the lead on, and there is a precedent for this. So if we look at the transport industry, for example, the new technologies like hydrogen power and you know, BEV, battery electric vehicles, like the larger scale things like the buses, the charge is being led by the public sector, not the private sector, because it's easier to decarbonize that fleet faster because there's more demands of government. It's a more direct form of market pressure, but they're setting a template. They're showing that it can be done. And that's where policy is really, really important, and where government initiatives are really, really important. It's to show that it can be done. And once it can be done, you'll find that private companies and private industry will lean into it. And because they're coming to us, and you know, we deal with a range of companies across this, from agriculture, energy, and transport, from DPD, CIE, ESB, all the three-letter acronyms, as well as the Hanover Rees of this world, and some others as well. And they are looking actively for solutions. They're terrified that they're going to get caught out. And the reality is, the ESG ratings are beginning to bite. If you're a company that produces a lot of carbon, that's going to sting. It's going to hurt your ESG ratings. And in turn, that's going to hurt your ability to actually raise capital at a decent price from the markets. So they know this is coming down the line. They know it's a problem, and they're trying to find a way to get something done about it. So we just need to set certain conditions. And in this country, we are uniquely positioned to do that. We are a very connected country. If you go to France or you go to Germany and you talk to somebody in a particular domain, whether it's carbon capture or net zero energy production, they don't really know what else is going on inside that country, and they can't really connect the dots between those things. Whereas in Ireland, we're so small, everybody knows what everybody else is up to, which gives us this advantage of being able to connect the dots between these things in a way that other countries can't. And we need to leverage that advantage just about every way that we can. And because innovation is connectedness. It is taking disparate things that don't initially seem connected and putting them together in a clever way and going, well, now they're more than the sum of their parts. So that's the startup community, it's the academic community, it's corporates and industry as well. If we can bring them together in a meaningful way, because they're all working on separate parts of the problem or they have a need for it, we just need to connect them together so they can all work together and that they can solve these problems together. That's really the condition that needs to be set. That's our opportunity. And all we need to do as a country is find some sort of initiative, and we're very good at this. So you saw what Board BIA have done, for example. We create these initiatives, and we can lean in behind these initiatives, and we can offer Ireland as a platform. If you're a startup, you need to work with corporates. Like you need their sponsorship, and they probably need what you're doing. So certainly in terms of carbon capture, if we're talking about carbon offsets, you know, they need that technology, if you're a startup, you need access to assets. If you're building software systems for wind turbines, well, then you need to work with a company that's willing to let you use their wind turbines as guinea pigs. And again, because we're so interconnected, and we have an opportunity in Ireland to offer Ireland as a platform to try these new technologies and to try that interconnectedness. And more than that, that gives us an opportunity then to punch above our weight. Right, that's the important thing. Like we're a tiny drop in the ocean, and it's very easy to get frustrated and say, why should we do anything? I mean, we're talking about reducing our dairy herd when Brazil is talking about increasing its herd, and that can be frustrating. But where we can punch above our weight is by showing the world how it's done, and we have all the necessary ingredients for that. We just need to stitch it together. We need to lean in behind it. And we need to recognize that this is going to be very, very good for the economy. And in the short term, that is the best reason to do this. It's about the money, and the money will drive it, and it will make sense, and we'll be in a very good position to take advantage of it. In the same way Norway has. They've done a marvelous job of turning that corner and being a major oil producer into one of the largest producers of green tech in the world, right? And they export it everywhere. Equinor are giants, and they're the leaders in this. So we have this opportunity, and I do believe, for example, that wind energy can do what North Sea oil has done for Aberdeen and for Oslo. And likewise, that opportunity is in every segment of decarbonisation, and that new technology is going to come from that.
Thank you so much, David.
So,
there's so
just have a few thoughts, Shirley.
Yeah, that I wish I could bottle. And I'll just react to one of them, which is I really appreciated what you said about innovation and how it's about bringing seemingly disparate things together. which is something that's so present in the carbon removal space and the sort of span of solutions. When you think about people that are removing carbon dioxide using HVAC systems to improve employee health in office buildings, or conducting aquaculture and growing more shellfish, which capture carbon into their shells and store it. So indeed, to Saiv's point, invoking the fact that there are non-carbon benefits to activities we might take explicitly because of carbon, but there's other things too. There's so many instances where we may be removing carbon in any case. And I think that really resonates with me, this idea of bringing disparate ideas together and the result being we make our atmosphere a little bit safer, a little bit healthier. But I have to close now and hand over to Chris because it's time for the next piece. But thank you so much, Hannah, Saiv, Brian, and David, for all of your comments for this conversation. I wish we had more time, and we'll see you in the breakout room shortly.